like to welcome everybody to the fourth Q&A session with Googler Top Shot Chris. Hopefully you caught this week's episode. I thought Chris's performance was amazing. I pinged him Wednesday morning and told him that he was my hero. And so I feel honored to be here.
Oh, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. I'm Marc Malonzo, and I work on Google Apps support with Chris. Actually, I started here, and he was my manager. So it's pretty awesome that get this experience. So let's see. This week's weapon selection was the crossbow. Were you at all surprised by this selection?
So Top Shot has a history of alternating between firearms and both modern and historic, and there's always some kind of non-firearms weapon at some point. In previous episodes, it's been anything from like slingshots to blow darts, rocks last season, throwing knives, tomahawks, and so recurve bow and compound bow in previous seasons. So we were definitely in the house. We were talking about what we thought the next weapon was going to be, and we actually thought that this challenge would have been a good time to introduce a non-explosive weapon, if you will. So not really surprised. We were actually anticipating it.
Okay, so you saw it coming. But so you've never shot a crossbow before, right? So what were your impressions of this weapon?
Yeah, when I was training to come on to Top Shot, I was I went to an archery range and did some compound bow and recurve bow practice, and it just actually never crossed my mind to think crossbow. And obviously, in retrospect, that was pretty dumb to not get a little bit of time behind a crossbow. But it was incredibly easy to shoot. The challenging piece with the crossbow is just the whole loading process, and there's a lot of parts where you can get mixed up, and if you have to start all over again in some instances. But once you've got the bolts loaded into the crossbow, it's got a trigger very similar to any sort of gun trigger, and the scope on it is just, I imagine it's just a regular weapon scope. And it actually shoots very much like a rifle. It has the same sort of feel of trigger, and then a forward grip, aim, squeeze the trigger. All the fundamentals of marksmanship really applied, when it came to actually shooting the crossbow.
Right, but probably cocking it was a little slightly different than a rifle. How hard was it to cock the crossbow? It looked a little difficult.
Yeah, so thankfully with the modern crossbow, we've got a lot of pulleys right on it to leverage so we can leverage our weight better to load it. As you saw in the team practice, you had this string with some hooks that you had to hook under, and then basically what Chris Brackett, who is our expert, he told us is keep our arms straight and basically use our upper body weight to lean and pull up with our waist and sort of lean back with our upper body. So the alternative and the sort of the wrong way to do it is if you're reaching down and you try and just muscle it and pull with your biceps. So once you kind of got the rhythm, it was fine. We saw Gabby, who is smaller framed. She doesn't have a lot of upper body mass, and so she kind of had to do a little bit of mix of bending at the waist, but then sort of since she wasn't very tall either, she didn't have a lot of height to be able to just keep her arms straight, so she had to bend at the waist, but then also use a little bit of her arm strength to really complete the cocking of the crossbow.
Yeah, she did look like she was kind of struggling with it at times.
The great thing about it though was once she was loaded, wow, she was just dead accurate. I mean, she can shoot so well, and in the team practice, she was just her groupings were really tight, and her form was just excellent, as it always is.
So kind of speaking along those lines, the show kind of just glossed over the team practice this time, I guess. So how did you rank as far as the other team members just during the practice?
How do we rank ourselves?
Compared to the rest of your team, how did you do?
I think that across the red team, we actually, I think, were pretty even. Gary was definitely a standout, which is why we put him in the last sixth position in the challenge. But yeah, from a marksmanship perspective, I think everyone on the red team did really well. And so yeah, Gabby was sort of because of again sort of her difficulty loading. We knew that was probably going to be an element in the challenge, right? Needing to load quickly in addition to being accurate.
Right. So going into the team challenge, were you surprised at all by the blue team selecting Tim to sit out for that challenge?
Not at all. When in the introduction to the weapon, and Colby asked us, right, who's got experience with the crossbow, and Tim raised his hand, and we kind of knew that was putting the nail in the coffin. And from a strategic perspective, it's a little challenging, right? I mean, Tim could have not raised his hand, but that wouldn't necessarily be honest. And so, how do you ride that fine line between being honest, being a good sportsman, and yeah, so some people might say, hey, right, Tim shouldn't have risen his hand. I mean, I don't blame him at all. I mean, it was an honest question.
So do you guys didn't give him a hard time for raising his hand, being all like, oh, I'm an expert with the crossbow?
Nah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, the same thing could have happened in the BAR challenge where Iggy, raised his hand and said, yeah, I fired the BAR before, but look what happened there. They decided to sit out Chee because of his military experience. So we weren't surprised that the blue team picked Tim, and we had actually, the one thing that I just loved about the red team and something that we didn't see on TV was all of our planning. We gamed out all sorts of different scenarios. What happens if Tim gets sit out? What's our shooting order going to be? What happens if Gary gets sat out? What would our shooting order be, and how would our strategy change? The one thing that we weren't sure about was, to what extent could the person sitting out participate in the challenge? We knew that they weren't going to shoot, but a core part of our strategy was having one single person calling out all of the motions, and that was going to be Tim's job. You might have heard it during the challenge where Tim was saying, hooks up, lean back.
Something about a thumb, I think.
Yep, white fletch down. The fletching is the kind of the feather arrow, the feathers on the backside of the bolt.
Okay.
There's the white fletch has to go down into the crossbow, and then he finished by saying, yeah, thumbs down. Because the thing is, if you're holding the front and your thumb is up, yeah, Chris Brackett told us, yeah, some people have lost thumbs.
Wow.
And broken thumbs by not keeping their thumb down. So that thumbs down was a crucial reminder. And then breathe. And so that breathing part is really important. When you're under that kind of stress, any kind of stress, sometimes, right, we all forget to breathe, and then your eyesight starts to go. Your focus starts to wane. And so that breathing step is a really crucial part of marksmanship, and so you're supposed to fire at the end of an exhale. Okay. Right? When you're not moving, right? You're exhaling and you stop, fire. And so yeah, Tim providing that cadence for us was a real important part, but we weren't sure before the challenge started whether Tim was out, or whoever sat out was going to be able to give those commands. But thankfully, they didn't have any rules against the person sitting out verbally participating.
Right on. I guess one follow-up question I had on that was, do you think anyone could use that to their advantage as a tactic? So if Tim actually had never seen a crossbow in his entire life, maybe raising his hand and saying he had an expert, just bluffing the other team, so then they would select him to sit out. Do you think that could play?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen that strategy play out in Top Shot yet, where a competitor says, yes, I've used a particular weapon, when that's not really the case. I think it, from a tactical perspective, sure. I mean, I think that would work. I think back to sort of, personal integrity and honesty and playing the game as fairly as you can. I mean, that's important to some, it's important to me. Like we saw maybe, last season with, I guess I'll just name names, with Jake, playing the game fairly wasn't necessarily a goal of his, right? The goal for him was to win.
Right.
Win, however, by whatever means necessary.
So I guess, going into the team challenge, how did you guys decide your team shooting order? Did you put your best first or last? Is it harder to shoot with less targets or more targets?
So yeah, the red team strategy, we pretty much went from weakest to strongest shooting order. And so Gabby was first, as previously mentioned, and as we saw on Tuesday. And we sort of assumed that with more points being available in those later rounds, that would be the strategic advantage for us. What happened was the blue team got a significant lead, right? In the first 2 rounds, it was 3-0 blue team. And that was something that I don't think we totally were ready for. We thought at least we'd get a point or two on the board. But to be that behind that early, it definitely adds a psychological element, right, to the game where it's like, oh crap, right, we now have to play catch up. Yeah. And so it was interesting for me to see the blue team strategy. So I remember, I have no idea what the blue team is thinking, and so they put William up first, and he was not their weakest shooter. He was one of their strongest shooters, and their idea was, right, let's get an early lead, let's get some momentum, put the red team on their back foot and have them playing catch up. So, whichever strategy, there's so many different strategies, and there's never you never know which one is the best one until you actually execute it. Well,
yeah, obviously your guys' strategy paid off because you were able to overcome that, and by no small part by you hitting 5 for 5, which was just amazing. We had a little party and everyone went wild.
Thanks. I got to say though, having Kyle and Chee ahead of me to tee that up was so critical. Kyle, when he was in the third position, and he was 0 to 3. Yeah. He was also in a really tough spot, and then when Chee came up, he got us tied up 7-7. So it was definitely a team effort, and for me, obviously, I played my role in extending, not just extending, but getting the lead and then teeing up Gary, right, to close it off.
Right. I guess so. Going off that, the show kind of mentioned that the crossbow, historically, was specifically designed for untrained soldiers to be able to, because it took so long to train archers, and now you have a weapon where you could have an untrained soldier. And I think kind of you made a perfect example of this, having never shot it before, and then you came up and went 5 for 5 and just completely destroyed it. How do you see where that fits from a historical standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, absolutely. As challenging as that whole loading process may be, at the end of the day, because the actual shooting piece is easier than a recurve bow. I could definitely see how a crossbow could just be a strategic advantage for a I don't even know what you call them, archery or for a fighting group, back in medieval times.
Yeah. So then after you guys won, the blue team had to go to the nomination range. Who did you think they would send to the elimination round? Were you surprised by the outcome of what they chose?
So while the blue team is off at elimination, the red team, we're just back at the house. We're just enjoying the rest of the day, doing laundry, whatever. The big talk, though, is, right, who do we think the blue team is going to nominate? We definitely thought that Collins' head was going to be on the chopping block, considering, right, he was in the 5th position and it was all tied up, and he didn't perform as well as he probably could have. He probably could have gotten another point or two. And so we were sort of expecting Colin to go, and you know, with Littlejohn, there was definitely a very clear tension in the house between those two. They didn't really play that up very much on TV, but you know, it was interesting for the red team, right? We're coming from this competition from a performance-based perspective, and you know, I don't know if we would have necessarily put Littlejohn up. Like if Littlejohn were on the red team, like, and we lost, like, I don't know if we would have voted for him. But knowing what the blue team sort of dynamic was about and sort of that tension, we were not surprised when Littlejohn and Colin were nominated.
So the elimination round was using the M&P 40. Have you ever shot that gun yourself?
I haven't, but I have heard so many good things about that gun, and I think it's definitely a weapon I need to get my hands on and see what it can do.
And the actual challenge seemed ridiculously hard. I mean, I would have just walked away. You win. I mean, how do you think you would have done if you had been there?
Yeah, wow. You know, when the blue team came back from the elimination challenge and they described what the challenge was, you know, I only had a vision in my head, and so Tuesday night was the first time that I've ever actually seen what it was all about. And to have a 3.5-inch, you know, diameter balloon at that very, very top peak, and right, you have not only that, but when the pendulum is swinging, you have a much shorter open window to shoot it. What an incredibly fun challenge. I don't know how I would have done. I would have loved to do it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the fun part about Top Shot is, right, you look at these challenges, you're like, wow, like I would love to do that and see how well I could do. And I think the great thing about Top Shot too is that you just get one shot at that challenge. I mean, right, if we had all day to practice it, right, eventually, right, you could get pretty good and, you know, master sort of the intricacies of any challenge. But right, this is just, you get this practice session and then you go. That's it. And that's sort of the beauty of the show, is to see which marksman can really quickly master a weapon and use it in a foreign, unfamiliar situation and perform under stress.
Yeah, and so the elimination round came down to really the last wire. It was really close. And then, of course, Littlejohn wins. And what's up with the bandanas? I gotta ask. Like, that was really weird.
So, you know, first of all, props to Colin. I mean, at one point, you know, Greg was up 9-5, and it looked like it was just all over.
Yeah.
And you know, Colin came back and tied it up. And you know, I think, you know, a great part about Top Shot is, you know, seeing how competitors struggle and how they push through that, and sometimes they overcome it, right, and they win. Other times, you know, they don't fall short. But I think the main point is, right, just to see, I don't know, I get a thrill out of just seeing people try, right, and just like pour every last, you know, ounce of energy and focus into the task at hand, regardless of whether they succeed or fail. But right, it's sort of that, you know, the means, you know, sort of justifying the ends a little bit, if you will. So to your question, so the blue team, yeah, they had this whole well, not the blue team, but certain people on the blue team had this whole bandana thing signifying friendship, and you know, it was really interesting where it actually was a divisive tactic. I don't know whether Greg was, and it wasn't Greg who was like the ringleader. This was just sort of like Greg and Michelle and Dylan and a few others. You know, they just started wearing these bandanas. And I think for them it was a way of, right, signifying their friendship. But yeah, they weren't really thinking about the consequences and how they were being perceived by the other blue team members. So when the blue team came back, let me sort of fast forward and then I'll rewind back. So when the blue team came back from the individual elimination, and maybe we'll see this next week, with Terry and Augie, I mean, they were cracking up. right? We had no idea what had happened, right? So we want to know, right, what was the challenge all about? Who won? Sort of tell us, some interesting things. And they walked into the house and they just started cracking up. And we're like, what's so funny? And they told us about the whole bandana thing. So we didn't think that they were actually going to air that footage. It just, the way that Terry and Augie had described it, it just sounded so awkward and sort of out of scope, if you will, for the show. But I think it made sense, sort of contextually, sort of what we've seen of Littlejohn. I think one take on it is, the first 3 challenges, he's realizing that, okay, right, like, he's not being the best team player that he could be. He's getting a little humbled, and so he wants to try and do his part to be a team player. And I think him giving the dirty, sweaty bandana to Colin was, in his own way, him trying in his way to sort of reconcile any differences that they had, and try and unite the blue team and move them forward. Right. We'll see whether he accomplishes his goal through that. I'll say in the moment, the bandana thing continues to be divisive for the blue team. And the red team, we just sit back and just go, wow, all right, let's just watch the blue team implode.
So that's actually what they led with. They came back from the elimination. You guys said, what happened at the elimination? They were like, bandanas.
They literally just, they spent about 3 minutes just laughing. And we're like, what? You got to tell us what's so funny. And they would try and start, and they would just start giggling and laughing, and they would restart and be like, bandanas. And then we're like, we're sitting there just going, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, what was the general reaction from the red team, or did you just laugh too, or just kind of write it off? That's
yeah,
the blue team?
And the red team, we started plotting, thinking like, can we sort of, play some kind of joke with using some kind of bandana thing.
Really? That would be awesome.
We'll see, we'll see what happens, in weeks to come. But yeah, you know what? I mean, you got to remember, we are living in a house together. We're all, at the end of episode 4, we've been together for 2 weeks, so 14 days. And we have no entertainment, no TV, no internet, cell phones, like nothing. So we're looking for entertainment. And when funny things like this happen, right, it's great fodder. I mean, not only for TV, but just in the house. Like, we are so bored looking for anything interesting to either happen or someone to say something, do something. So yeah, red team, we definitely liked watching the blue team, hijinks and antics happening from afar.
Right. Well, do you have anything else to add about the episode in general before we open it up to questions?
I think the last thing that I have to say is, I think a lot of Top Shot fans, when they hear that there's like a non-firearms weapon, like a bow or some sort of throwing, weapon, that I think they get a little disappointed before the episode has aired, but after they see it, Top Shot, the producers do such a great job of, creating these interesting challenges, and for me, also just the dramas and the shooting, right? To see, like red team, right? We were behind, and like, right, are we going to be able to pull it together? We tie it up, and then we pull ahead, and then that 6th round, Dylan on the blue team actually had a chance to win it, and it was close, but in the end, Gary closed it off for us.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on another win.
Thanks. Feels good. Back to back.
Yeah. Do we have any questions out here?
How much does the production of the television part of the show interfere with the actual competition and the plain old marksmanship? It seems like there's a lot going on to produce the show that might interfere with, practice and competition and whatnot.
Yeah, great question. So I think for me, the first, few interactions, like at the, the M14, the very first elimination challenge and the plate challenge, seeing all these, so they do a pretty good job of any cameras that are in front of us. They put camouflage on them, and they try and sort of make it blend into the environment. I imagine it's more for TV sake versus for like our sake. But then also they have, you know, cameras on, you know, big, you know, swing arms. That was a little distracting at first, but then you know what? Once the competition starts, like you get tunnel vision, and whatever's in front of you is your focus. And so, from a competition perspective, I don't think that the cameras were very distracting. It was very fun though, to have a crew anywhere from like 50 to 200 people out there, you know, watching, right? They're filming, but right, they're watching and they're enjoying it. And so they're our audience, you know, for the competition. So that was a lot of fun. I would say, on that note of the production, you know, getting in the way of things, the most kind of annoying piece was actually living in the house and having the cameras following you around there. And imagine you wake up in the morning and you're eating a bowl of Cheerios and drinking your coffee, and a camera's just staring at you literally for a minute and a half, just getting you, you know, just sipping your coffee and eating your cereal. And you're like, okay, when are they going to go away? And they just sit there and you kind of do it again. And we kind of did funny things where we kind of learned kind of how to get the cameras away. Like they oftentimes didn't like us cussing or talking about sort of like, there were a lot of inappropriate jokes that were going on in the house. So anytime we wanted the cameras to go away, someone would just like fire up an inappropriate joke, and then all of a sudden you see on the camera people wander off. So yeah, that was kind of fun.
So I really got fired up about that crossbow, and I was thinking about Mother's Day or something like that. Maybe I can ask my husband to get that for me. What did they run, and also how the heck did you acquire your target in that challenge? I thought that was amazing.
So thank you, and I actually don't know how much crossbows run. They're pretty affordable, a few $100. You know, on the low end, and yeah, you know what, like, oh, that particular cross, oh, so yeah, the striker, I think it runs like around $1,200 to $1,500, I think, and that's without the scope, but don't quote me on that. But you know, it's you know, definitely higher end. Maybe it's even more. Again, don't quote me on that. But yeah, in terms of target acquisition, that's a really good question. And you know, somebody, one of my friends pointed out to me that I think the only competitor that was shooting up. So most teams were using an ambush tactic, which is basically you hold your point of aim, and most people were holding it at the bottom in the center. So you just hold the target steady, you wait for your target to come into your field of view, and then you fire. In my mind, you know, I'm thinking, how can I optimize, you know, just everything? And part of that is I need to minimize the amount of time that I'm waiting, right? I need to load and just fire as quickly as possible. So, well, after I loaded, you know, I took a very quick glance to see, okay, which target is still open. I wanted to avoid a problem that Terry had, right? Where he shot the same target twice, and that doesn't get him an extra point. And so I took a quick snapshot of, okay, you know, which target is open, and then, you know, bring the scope up to my eye level, and that can be a tricky transition, right? To go from, like, you know, if looking at something 35 feet away, and then all of a sudden you've got a scope that's, you know, just inches from your eye, and then you've got a very narrow field of view, and you're trying to reacquire a moving target. Yeah, basically my approach was, I'm just going to fire at whatever target is open as quickly as possible. I'm not going to wait to ambush targets. I'm going to track tracking is the other tactic that, you know, that I employed.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I guess we can go to. Oh, you did have another question?
Nope.
All right. We have a couple of questions.
Actually, I had a quick question.
Internet. All right.
Oh, do we have a VC question?
Yeah, I had a quick question. You guys can hear me. Littlejohn, well, he comes off like not the most pleasant individual in general. he seems to have quite a bit of attitude and causing a lot of problems. Is there more of that that is off camera that up to this point that you don't get to see?
Yeah, good question. You know what's interesting about Greg is, you know, he's a really great guy, you know, but he does have the side of him where, right, his nerves you know, affect his shooting, and you know, there's definitely a lot more that's happening off camera, a lot, you know, dynamics between the blue team, and you know what, like something that's also not being shown is the dynamic between Greg and the red team, and not just Greg and the red team, but really just all of us. You know, we all live together. It's not like we have like separate areas of the house or anything for teams, and you know, for me, it's interesting to see, you know, what footage of Greg and obviously all the rest of us, like what they're deciding to choose. Hopefully that answers your question.
So you're saying he's not as big of a prick as they're making him look like? Because he's not someone I would hang out with. I would not want him near on the firing line with me.
Yeah, no, he's a great guy. I think he's the type of person that, you know, once you get to know him and he gets to know you, right? That's when things, you know, are in a good place. But yeah, you know, I mean, I still stay in touch with him as well as other you know, competitors, and we'll see if Greg can kind of pull it together and unify with the blue team a little bit more. But it's been kind of fun to see how, again, you know, I've been not privy to a lot of the blue team dynamics. I mean, we sort of, red team, we see on the face of it what's happening, but, you know, they have they're having their own team meetings, and right, you know, we get to see some of that dynamic happen, right? Terry's taking you know, an informal leadership role and trying to, you know, get them together. You have a question over here.
I was just going to ask you.
Oh, here, Mike's back.
So, Chris, I was just going to ask you, going back to the Greg discussion, if you yourself, in speaking about dynamics between the blue and red team, did you earn yourself a dirty blue or dirty friendship bracelet, rather?
No, I have no friendship bracelets in my possession, and it's funny. Yeah, after, we'll see what happens. I'll give just a tiny teaser in the next week. Basically, bandanas became like you know, faux pas and, you know, verboten sort of thing to have. So I think you'll see the bandanas sort of disappear. And the red team, I mean, I think maybe one or two people. Actually, yeah, Gabby wore a bandana, but that was sort of just on her own. Like, and she would wear her bandana like as a Rambo.
It wasn't a friendship bandana.
It was not a friendship bandana. It was a very, you know, functional bandana to keep her hair up out of her eyes and, you know, keep the sweat out of her eyes. Yeah.
Hey, Chris.
Going to.
Oh, sorry, another question
from BC.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Yes.
Description. Quick question. At this point, you know, with 4 competitions under your belt, how much are you sizing up people on the red team and blue team thinking forward? You know, at the time when teams are not going to be relevant anymore and it's going to be everyone against everyone. Are you thinking about that at this stage, or are you still very team focused?
It's a really good question. Yeah, for me, I was definitely thinking forward as well. And, you know, it's like, wow, okay, you know, who's gonna, you know, possibly, you know, if I, you know, continue to make it to, you know, the green shirt phase, which is the individual, you know, part of the competition, you know, who do I need to be worried about? But, you know, it was not something that I was obsessing over because, you know, at this point in teams, the focus is to win as a team, because if your team wins, you are immune, right, from elimination. But, yeah, you know, I guess some people at this point that, you know, really stood out in my mind as being, you know, potential threats, you know, at the individual stage, definitely Kyle. Kyle absolutely is he's just been doing so well. And he's very understated and very humble, and, you know, wasn't boasting about, you know, his performance. And I think his strategy was to lay low, as best as he can. Gabby also, she's just been killing it. And the other person, Chee. She has definitely just been doing so well at this point. And so in my mind, those are sort of the main competition from an individual perspective. On the blue team, William Bethards is probably the one person in my mind at that time that I saw as sort of, a standout. And honestly, yeah, at this point, Littlejohn a little bit. I mean, he's come back from 2 elimination challenges, and that's hard. I mean, to be under that kind of pressure and to, it's all on the individual. You don't have your team that you can hide behind. And so when you come back from an elimination challenge, you earn a lot of respect, not just from the competitors, in the house, but also from, viewers and fans watching the show. So, Littlejohn is as much of sort of the villain as he's, currently, being portrayed as. Like, he's a really good shooter.
Yeah. All right, we'll go into Google Moderator. We have several questions. Probably the most popular one, though, is definitely, has the nickname Van Helsing stuck? That's asked by Patsy Price.
In the house, yeah, the Van Helsing nickname stuck around, but only for a few days, and then we all moved on to other things. One of my buddies, he changed that nickname to Cheng Helsing. Nice. So maybe we'll see if that sticks. I don't know if I like the ring of that, but you can't choose your nicknames, right? So we'll see.
That's totally your name now at work.
Update my online profile.
Exactly. Big Ray Bustos asks, during the elimination challenge, everyone brings a backpack that looks totally full. Why? It's been bugging me.
I love this question. It comes up really often, and basically in these backpacks, we're going from the house to the to the set and to the range. Sometimes the weather can fluctuate really quickly. It is August and September down in LA. So in the daytime, it's super hot, triple-digit heat. But then it can get colder. So we've got jackets, we've got layers, like undershirts and stuff. Some people have sunscreen, water bottles, food, because we have a lot of snacks that we can take with us. So those are also in our backpacks. For me, I actually had a set of baseball cleats. So I actually had, sort of street shoes, like sort of skate shoes that were what I would prefer to compete in. But if there was a challenge where I knew like I needed better traction running around or whatever, like I had a pair of metal cleats in my bag that I could switch into. Nice. So yeah, I mean, and then we had our ear protection, eye protection. Some competitors carried around like notes from home, from like their significant others, from their kids. And so like before challenges, like they would, pull out a note and like read a note from their kid, sort of as a way to, kind of get that inspiration and motivation.
Okay, so it looks like we have a question from all the way from North Carolina. Aaron Joyner asks, each episode seems to take around 3 days, one practice day, one competition day, one challenge day. Does this pace continue unabated for the whole taping, or are there down days? Like, do you get weekends off?
Yeah, great question. So every 10th day is a rest day, and it's, I think, mandated by, I don't know, the union, like the cruise union or something. So yeah, there's a dark day, as it's called, and they bring in a barber so we can get our hair cuts. And yeah, it's nice to have a day off, right, where everyone can just relax, exercise. Like I tried to get, we had like an elliptical machine, some free weights, sort of a pull-up bar, kind of contraption, and you get some exercise in just to kind of get your mind off things and stay in shape. Right. Too. The interesting thing about exercising though is, at least for me and most of the competitors, we didn't want to have exercise routines where we were going to get fatigued, right? We weren't like, doing routines to, build muscle. It was more cardio, but we didn't want to be sore the next day, right? If we needed to, be doing rope climbing or swinging, like we're going to see next week. So that was something to keep in consideration of, I need to be in top performance shape for the next day.
I guess one person asks, where does the host stay during the entire competition? Is he on site or with you guys, or on a separate location?
Yeah, no, Colby does not live in the house with us. He's off. He's got his own trailer and whatnot. So he's very, very comfortable and well taken care of.
Let's see. Bo Hunter from San Jose says, having little to no experience with a crossbow, what other weapon or previous experience were you able to compare it to that helped you dominate in that round?
As I mentioned earlier, it's very similar to rifle shooting. Just once you've got that bolt locked in, it is very much like just shooting a rifle. And so I think the neat thing about marksmanship is that you have these core fundamentals like trigger control, sight acquisition, breathing techniques that can apply across, a lot of weapons. And so, for me, just keeping it simple, I think one advantage that I have over other competitors is that I don't have formal training, so I don't have any sort of hang-ups or habits that I need to undo. And so when I see an unfamiliar weapon like the crossbow, it's really about just zeroing in on the basics and the fundamentals and just shooting.
Okay, so Addie from San Jose asks, how much easier is it to hit a bullseye with a crossbow than a regular bow?
I think that's a real personal question that just really depends on the shooter.
Well, for you.
For me, well, I don't do bows and arrows and crossbows very often, so I think, out of from the little experience that I do have, I would say the crossbow is much easier because you have a scope. On a recurve or a compound bow, you have this little eyelet. So when you pull the string back, you've got this little plastic piece that's basically serving as your aim, your eyesight, and then you've got these little marks, sort of where your hand is. So it's less accurate for sure. So I would choose crossbow, I guess.
Okay. I guess Aaron Joyner had one other question. It's a good one. Based on your surgical performance with the crossbow, you seem to have a knack for this weapon. Have you bought one to play with yet?
I have not purchased a crossbow because I have many other guns that I want to purchase first, and I've actually got a few guns on their way. A Glock 34, which is a competition pistol, and a Ruger 1022 rifle. Shoots 22 rounds, $300, so really cheap and fun rifle to just plink and shoot in minimal recoil. You can get like 5,000 rounds for I think like $200, something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's just dirt cheap. So no crossbow. I don't foresee a crossbow or any sort of bow and arrow weapons coming into my possession anytime soon.
Did we have any other questions from the audience? Anyone?
Or VC.
Or VC?
So what about food in the house? I know here in our culture, the food's pretty important here, but how did you get fed?
So yeah, obviously the food here at Google is just amazing, and they pamper us really well, and I think our expectations for what food can and could and should be is definitely raised here. In the house, I was really concerned about the food situation before coming on the show, because outside of Google, I like to eat good food, and I cook at home. And I have my favorite restaurants and stuff I like to go to. I was pleasantly surprised by how well we ate. I ate better in the Top Shot house than I do at home. Not better than at Google, but better than I eat at home. And here's why. So we would have just a piece of a pad of paper in the kitchen, and we could write down things that we wanted. They wouldn't, and then a production assistant would run off to Costco or Walmart and get as many of those things as they could. They didn't get everything, but we had Costco ribeye steaks and the pork chops and like whole chickens and beef and pork ribs. And I can cook, and I was kind of concerned that, wow, like, am I going to be the only one that can cook? But no, like, William can cook, Chee can cook, Greg can cook, Colin can cook, and we had all these people who could actually cook. It was mealtime was definitely one of those bonding experiences for the whole house, right? Because people are helping, chop onions and garlic, and it wasn't all like top ramen or like microwave dinners. We were actually like preparing dishes from scratch, and so for me that was also a great way to burn the time. Big like stress reliever for me to just be able to focus on something. I love cooking. It's something that's a very fun, enjoyable activity for me. So to be able to take my attention sort of off of the competition and just cook and eat a good meal and just enjoy some good company was a real pleasant surprise.
Anybody else?
I had one other quick question. So far it seems that the individual elimination challenges have almost been cooler to watch and participate in than the team challenges. After you've seen some of them, do you kind of agree? Do you feel disappointed you didn't have a chance to actually do some of the elimination challenges? Maybe not with the option of being eliminated, but to be able to do them at least?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a trademark of Top Shot where, usually they save the best for those individual eliminations. I think part of it is to make, to extend the excitement to the end of the episode, right? So people, right, stay and watch the end. Also from a logistical perspective, though, when you've got, 16 competitors that you have to run through a challenge, just logistically, it limits sort of the things that you can do. And also, there are time constraints. Like we have to get filming done within, a certain time of day or overtime for the crew members, and then expenses just run up through the roof. So the individual eliminations, right? They can. It's easier to run, 2 people through a grenade launcher challenge with platforms exploding, which were some of the coolest things that I've ever seen in my life. And so to your question, that was definitely one challenge. It was like, wow. I mean, I'm not going to be like Dylan and say I wish I was sent to elimination, but I wish I had an opportunity to fire that grenade launcher, and then it would have been nice to have shoot it at an exploding platform like that as well.
Yeah. Anybody else on VC? All right. Well, I'd like to give a special thank you to Chris for coming and giving us answers to all of our wildest questions.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Marc, for moderating, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And I'll stick around a little bit after if anyone wants to chat.